I'm Shashikant Lonikar, Chartered Accountant. Welcome you all on the second day of Direct Tax Refresher course. I formally welcome CA Rahul Charkha, today's our faculty, CA Ruta Chitle, MCM Pune ICI. Now I request Ruta Chitle ma'am to give welcome address.
Thank you, Shashikant sir. This is the second day of our DTRC. Just to remind the participants, it is many years ago. In fact, it was when our current CCM, Chitre sir, was chairman. He had started this DDRC course that I remember he has been telling me that this was a well-liked course. So welcome all of you for this course. As far as today's speaker is concerned, I would like to mention two things. One, of course, that he is an expert in this particular field. But not only that, he has always been supportive of all the initiatives of Pune branch. For example, just recently when we had carried out the exam, I mean the ICI is conducting the exams, he was one of the persons who came forward and told us that whatever help you require, please give us. I think that this was a right moment to tell you also and share with you all of you about his gesture. I'm really thankful, Rahul sir, for this thing. And with this, I request Sachinand Lonika sir to introduce him because on this note, I think this is the right time and right point to introduce him formally. So over to you, Shashikant sir.
Thank you, madam. Our today's speaker, CA Rahul Charkha, is a director in the tax practice of ELP, focusing on direct taxes. He is a qualified chartered accountant. He specializes in advising domestic and foreign MNCs across various sectors from a direct tax perspective. Rahul has over 10 years of experience in advising clients on a variety of direct tax projects involving structuring of inbound and outbound investment from a tax and exchange control regulatory perspective. Deal structuring, internal structuring, advising multinational entities on tax efficient profit repatriation, structuring cross-border transaction, transfer pricing reviews, tax due diligence, and transaction support. Rahul has also been involved in assisting clients in direct tax litigation at various forums. He has also been part of various conferences and contributed articles on direct tax issues. Prior to joining ELP, Rahul was part of the direct tax team at PricewaterhouseCoopers and KPMG. Rahul, now I hand over a session to you for starting the session.
Thank you, Sashikant sir, for that elaborate brief, and thank you, Ruta madam. It's only the 2 cents of contribution that that we can give back to this wonderful profession that we belong to. Nothing is enough, and I think we only aspire to do as much as what you do for the society and for the fraternity as a whole. So friends, good evening. I know I'm caught at the wrong time in terms of a Saturday 6 p.m. session, and the only in this context I can say the fortunate part is it's during a lockdown, so hopefully I'm not spoiling a weekend on direct tax sessions. Right? Before I begin, I just hope and pray that you all are keeping safe from this pandemic which has hit us, and also a moment to remember our loved ones who have succumbed to this pandemic. May their souls rest in peace. With that, I remember, in fact, I think it was the last session before the formal lockdown was announced in March 2020, when I was at the Pune branch on the same topic of faceless assessments. And it was a nice interactive session. I'm not sure how many of the participants were present then, but a lot of ideas were exchanged, because the whole topic was so nascent at that time that we were all in the unknown, or rather the fear of unknown, where everyone was anxious of what would happen and where would this go to. Since 1961, or maybe even earlier, the 1922 Act as well, always had procedures for carrying out assessments in a manner which we are all used to. where we would meet tax officers, explain our point of views, have healthy discussions, healthy differences many a times, and one way or the other, either be convinced or try and convince or impress upon the other side a point of view which we believe is right. That, of course, was to change. It has changed. Faceless assessment is a reality. It's not just a reality. In fact, a year has gone by where we have now seen the processes followed in the faceless assessment scheme. While we dwell upon all of them in terms of how the year has been and how has the scheme overall fared so far, it's important to at a conceptual level or at fundamental level try and understand one thing, because that's a general feedback that I believe most of us have, is why faceless? Why faceless assessment? Was this even necessary? If you ask me, in my personal opinion, uh, it's quite an out of the box thinking, because if you look at it objectively, and for a moment, I know we keep the practicality aside, and which we will dwell or touch upon when we go further. But if you just look at it objectively, just think of the efficiencies that the whole system actually brings in. If hand on heart, does every assessment really need a hearing, or does every assessment really need to be face to face? And again, a sad but fortunate part of it is that the pandemic has actually helped us, because I'm sure all of us today see the way we are meeting. As I said, probably when it all began, including myself, we're all comfortable in meeting and greeting and interacting with each other in an offline form. But today we are all happy speaking to our screens, looking at each other's faces on the screens. So it's only about, I think, a few change. We will come to certain. It's not that it does not have any shortcomings, or it is not that the scheme is foolproof. But I think there we will have a role to play, and let's see how or what we can do. What are my thoughts, and of course, open for exchange of ideas in terms of what others believe can be done to improve it. I'm just going to now share my screen so that you don't have to look at my face. It's faceless after all. Yeah. My screen can be seen. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So, just as a background in terms of certain context and what the journey has been so far. Now we all know digitization, and I do not know really because I can't see the audience, but most of us would have witnessed the whole Y2K issue in terms of how internet and Internet of Things has evolved, and how it's just taken over our lives so much so that it's become as important as a roti kapda makan. Tax or tax administration could not have been left away from it. It all started in 2006. That was the first time when e-filing of TDS returns was mandated. It was quite a disruption, I would say. At least I vaguely remember at that point in time, in 2006, when the whole scheme of compliances of TDS was made in an e manner. It was not even actually faceless or online. It was just made e. Going on 2006, of course, we had companies filing e-filing the returns or the return forms. But if you see, generally there was quite a lull between 2007 and 2015. And in fact, for most of us, it would be 2016 or maybe 17, because in 2015 is when the government started a pilot project where they started an email-based assessment in 5 cities. Now, email-based assessment, I think as we go further, we'll all have to acclimatize ourselves with what is email-based assessment, e-proceedings, e-assessments, faceless assessments, and they're all different, and we'll all obviously, most of us, of course, know about it, and we will discuss that further. but the pilot project, upon its success, was then in May 16 extended to 2 more cities. The real jinx in the armory was, in February 2017, when 102 cities were brought under this ambit of e-proceedings or e-assessments as such. That, of course, also was because of a lot of back-end changes in the systems in the income tax department. But by far, 102 cities, I think, would cover at least most of the economically well-to-do cities of the country. It moved on to, the introduction of a faceless assessment, and that was the idea which was first planted in February 2018. And it's interesting to, the then finance minister mentioned in the budget speech, late Shri Arun Jaitley ji, where if you can see your screens, where he obviously posed a lot of confidence on the pilot e-assessment launched in 2016 and then extended to 102 cities in 2017. And the whole idea was, transform the age-old assessment procedure of income tax department and the manner in which they interact with taxpayers and other stakeholders. Now, this to me is the key and the epicenter of the entire reform, if I was to call it, in the whole assessment proceeding space. The transformation of the assessment procedures and a radical shift in the manner in which income tax departments and taxpayers and other stakeholders interact with each other. The memorandum, of course, introduced 2 more sections in the form of 143.3a and 143.3b to enable the administrative authorities to come up with faceless or e-assessment schemes. Moving forward, what we see happened in budget of 2019, and this is interesting because I must give credit to the honorable, the current or the present honorable finance minister as well, to be as candid in her budget speech as by far anyone that I would have seen in my career. And it's interesting, what she says is that the existing system of scrutiny assessment in the income tax department involves a high level of personal interaction between the taxpayer and the tax department, which leads to certain undesirable practices on the part of tax officials. The importance and relevance of budget speech, we all, of course, are aware of. And just to highlight here, I think the Supreme Court in KP Varghese has been very articulate about the importance of a budget speech, and for a finance minister to be so candid about this is really commendable. Of course, but that was just the basis to a reform which was proposed in terms of a faceless assessment. While we are all aware, I think it's just so that I set the context right. The clear difference between an e-assessment and a faceless assessment would mean that in an e-assessment system, the taxpayer or the assessee would know who the tax officer is. It is just that the communication would be in electronic form. However, in the faceless assessment scheme, the taxpayer does not know who the tax officer is. It could be anyone in India. And the communication, of course, remains anonymous, at least from the taxpayer side, or the anonymity is for the taxpayer, where he does not know where the communication is coming from. It is a national faceless assessment unit or a center which is communicating with the taxpayers, and we'll of course come to the procedure, which in my view is quite complex, but still very relevant. Fast forwarding August 2020, I think the e-assessment scheme that was introduced in 2019 to go along with the 143.3a and 143.3b and 143.3c introduced in the Income Tax Act was renamed to a faceless assessment scheme. We obviously had, that was a time when the whole country was into lockdown. but we saw a slew of measures on the assessment proceeding side, which took place between then and as we stand today. Uh, Interestingly, in August of 2020, so all this while best judgment assessments was for some reason left outside the scheme of e-assessment. In August 2020, the government in its wisdom got the best judgment assessment also within the ambit of faceless assessment. We are all aware of the September 2020 introduction of the Taxation and Other Laws Relaxation and Amendment of Certain Provisions Act 2020. For just so that I can catch some breath, I am going to refer to this as Torah in the rest of my my slides. So Torah introduced Section 144B. Okay, 144B effectively in the Taxman's Act, which I use, is a section which runs into 10 pages. It effectively lays down the whole scheme of assessment. If one were to look at it prima facie, it pretty much is just a codification of the e-assessment scheme that was prevalent in 2019. However, it was put in the form of a section or a code in the Act. Unfortunately, since the Torah did not have much of a debate or a memorandum or notes or any other supporting documents to it, the precise or the real reason of having or introduction of 144B is not known, at least from the government side. But I would believe that that introduction would probably be because the faceless assessment scheme was a scheme ultimately which was laid down by the powers conferred upon the administrative bodies under Section 143(3)(a. That formed a part of a delegate legislation, which means to say that it was not a part of the Act, it was not a provision in the Act, it was a delegate legislation in the form of a scheme or a circular, which too was probably in the right technicalities. The need was felt to codify it and make it a form of make it a part of the Act, and that's why Section 144B being introduced. September 2020 faceless appeal scheme notified, Jan 21 faceless penalty scheme notified, Feb 21 amendments to include DRP within the schemes, and it just took off from there. In fact, as we stand today, this is what you see on your screen is just a list of provisions or sections which have been laid down in the Act to empower introduction or coming up with faceless schemes. And if we can just together go through it one by one, it's quite interesting on how our interaction with the tax authorities, as was envisaged by the erstwhile finance minister, is actually going to see light of the day. Section 130, of course, faceless jurisdiction for IT authorities. That is more of an administrative power or powers granted to tax authorities. But 135A, faceless collection of information. 142B, faceless valuation or faceless inquiries. 144B, of course, we will dive deep into faceless assessments. 151A, faceless income escaping assessment. 157B, faceless rectifications. That too was left out of the faceless scheme in the e-assessment scheme, but enabling provisions have been made. Of course, the scheme has not yet been out in 157A, but we will eventually not be surprised if we see rectifications also being conducted in a faceless manner. Well, how far that goes is a matter of discussion, which we will in the course of this presentation. Faceless recovery and collection of taxes. I still can't imagine how this is going to work, but the whole faceless scheme continues to surprise me, as I think it would for most of us. Faceless revisions. So the commissioner or the powers conferred on the Commissioner Administration for revision of orders to be faceless, faceless approvals, faceless registrations, faceless DRP, and it just doesn't stop there. The last one is still something which I personally bat for, and it's a little different, which talks about appeal to ITAT in a faceless form. Now please bear with me here. The provisions only on filing of appeals to ITAT, which I personally believe that it can and it should be done in a faceless manner, given the whole technological advantage that we have. However, what is a gray, and a serious gray, is the last point on this slide, is the faceless procedure of ITAT. If the vision of the finance minister was to see the light of the day, we will have ITAT decisions come out only basis submissions. As much as radical it may sound, we all are quite skeptical about its functioning. There are multiple writs filed challenging the constitutionality, the validity of provisions of having a faceless ITAT. But it's only for time that we'll have to wait for, so that we know which ways this aspect heads to. A lot of notifications, so much of changes, so much to track, so much to amend. In fact, I have 4 slides which only talks about, or these 4 slides that you see on the screen, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are only about how or discussing the evolution of faceless assessment schemes as it stands today, and also various circulars and various amendments and orders and notifications issued by various authorities for its implementation. You see two particular circulars being marked in orange. That is, of course, to highlight that one is the scope of section 144B. Let me remind and reiterate again. 144B codes or lays down the scheme of faceless assessment in the Income Tax Act as it stands today, with effect from 1st of April 2021. Now 144B is the whole topic for discussion when it comes to faceless assessments. And subsection 2 empowers CBDT to lay down administrative circulars to determine the scope of 144B. It's important for us to understand, because this particular circular and this particular provision is creating a lot of gray again, owing to the powers in it, as well as some of the shift in timelines and completion of assessment proceedings. And if I may just take the opportunity to discuss that issue in brief at this stage itself. Now there is a circular or an order number 187/3 of 2020, which says that all the assessment proceedings pending as on 31st of March 2021 and the assessment proceedings initiated on or after 1st of April 2021. So one which is pending on 31st March 21 and assessment proceedings initiated after 1st April 2021 will effectively be carried out and completed under the provisions of section 144B, right? Now this is interesting because there were slew of measures on account of lockdown where a lot of assessment completion timelines were moved from 31st of March 2021 to 30th of June 2021, in some cases maybe even more. But what's important is that all the assessments that were carried out, because 144B became effective from 1st of April 2021. So in essence, the assessments that were concluded from 1st of April 2021 to 30th of June 2021 were required to be carried out in accordance with the provisions of section 144B, which also means that they were required to be carried out by following the procedure laid down in section 144B of this Income Tax Act. On many occasions, what has been noticed is that that procedure has not been followed, which effectively mean that in certain cases, in fact, and which we will discuss when we discuss some case studies, that a writ jurisdiction has been invoked to say that the whole assessment proceeding tantamounts to be void because of the procedure laid down in 144B not being followed. It is interesting. It is also important that we as practitioners very carefully evaluate this point for all our clients, because in reality, what is seen is that most of the assessment orders passed between 1st April 2021 to 30th of June 2021 were under 143.3 read with 143.3A or 3B or 3C, but those subsections 3A, 3B, and 3C are ineffective post 1st of April 2021. Moving on, I think we've spoken about the whole faceless assessment, and let's try and understand, how does the assessment procedures or the proceedings really work in the faceless assessment scheme, or 144, as has been laid down or codified in the Act. Now, it's important that all of us acclimatize ourselves with these terms, because they are the future of assessment proceedings under income tax. There is, of course, an SSC. There is a National Faceless Assessment Centers. I'm sure many of us would have seen notices, issued to our clients, and the communication channel has been National Faceless Assessment Center. The National Faceless Assessment Center is nothing but a nodal authority, which is more like holding all the stakeholders and agencies together. It is also the nodal authority for communication, not only between the SSE and the tax authorities, but also various units of income tax inter se. Apart from that, there are regional faceless assessment centers. Regional faceless assessment centers can loosely be understood to be a subset or a vice captain to national faceless assessment centers. They more play their role at a regional level. Every regional faceless assessment center heads 4 units, right? There is assessment unit, verification unit, technical unit, and review unit. I will not spend much time here, because I believe we all must have by now read and understood enough on what each of this unit does, where so far as assessment proceedings are concerned, and of course when we discuss the whole flow chart of the schema, we will understand the role of each and every unit. But important to note, the communication between assessee and NFAC is, of course, through emails, through the portal, which we are all waiting to be up and running, and the SMS being sent as a notification for any notice being issued or any communication being issued. The objective or the key features of the faceless assessment scheme: no human intervention. When they say no human intervention, I understand what they mean is, of course, there is no face-to-face interaction. It's all electronic, without knowing whom you are interacting with. Dynamic jurisdiction. You don't need to know, going helter-skelter in Swargate tax office or Salisbury Park tax office, knowing which company, which SSC, what PIN code, what is the starting alphabet, to know the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction for assessment is being kept dynamic, which means a return filed can actually be assessed by any assessment unit all over India. It's a team-based working. It's quite interesting, and I keep imagining or wondering, even when we speak to our our friends in the tax office on what their experience has been. It's quite novel, this way of working, because typically one assessment unit, I've been told, has about 24 assessing officers, which we would otherwise have in the normal scheme. A strength of 20 to 24 assessing officers working together uh, is, is going to be quite a corporate way of working. So we all wait to see how this team-based working actually transpires in reality. Functional specialization, this is again a very key point. And while we in Pune, of course, are are more bound by the automotive or the IT sector. Uh, in fact, what our experience has been and what my personal experience has been is that in some certain specialized sectors, like let's say banks or insurances or shipping, aviation, these are sectors which require real knowledge of their functionings and operations in order to decide or to come to any fair assessment of how their taxability should work. uh, I think a functional specialization unit or teams carrying out assessment will certainly go a long way in enhancing the quality of assessment. And at least that's what we will all hope for, that we are really confronting or disputing the assessment orders on real legal issues or differences of opinion between the tax authorities and the taxpayers, rather than mere factual issues or issues which are more rectifications or rectifiable in nature. Moving on, won't take too much of time in knowing what each unit does. If I may just quickly try and take you or spend about 5 minutes to explain the whole scheme on how it works. I hope you can see my screen and the Excel sheet there. Uh, it's just a little uh, uh, it's just a little complex in terms of how the whole process flows. But as mentioned earlier, the National Faceless Assessment Center, now that's the nodal authority. That is the authority which is going to communicate with the SSC or with the assessment unit, verification unit, review unit, technical unit, all the units within the tax department as well. So at the first stage, the National Faceless Assessment Center, or the NFAC, issues a notice to the SSC, to which the SSC is supposed to respond in 15 days. What happens if there is no response in 15 days? Well, what we were told in the earlier scheme was, at least, and that was based on an oral interaction at an ICAI event, that the submit button in the portal is frozen. We're not then able to submit it. Of course, we all, as I said, wait to look for the new portal and how that functions. The the submission of the response by the SSC to the NFAC, basis the submission or basis the response, the NFAC will allocate the case or the matter for to an assessment unit. Now, this allocation is based on an automated allocation system. The system has at least tried to have minimal human influence, if not in interaction, but minimum human influence on the allocation of cases. Then after that, the assessment unit further, of course, analyzes, processes the responses received from the SSCs, and after that, there are 2 or 3 options which the assessment unit really has, and if we have to take these options one by one, but it can either then send it across or send it back to the SSC, calling for further information, or whatever information has been received can be sent to the verification unit or the technical unit, either to verify certain facts, or the technical unit on some point of law where it needs some inputs, right? Taking on the first case where it is really issued to the SSC is obviously supposed to file a response. If a response is not filed by the SSC, then a show cause notice is issued uh, asking why a best judgment assessment should not be carried out. If a response is still not received from the SSC, then obviously an intimation is sent to the assessment unit to carry out a best judgment assessment. If a response is filed, or if a response is filed by the SSC upon receipt of the show cause notice, the NFAC then further forwards that response to the assessment unit. The assessment unit is supposed to analyze that response further, and basis its analysis, the assessment unit is supposed to obviously make a draft assessment order. Now, between the draft assessment order and the issue of notice, there could be occasions of multiple to and fro between the SSC and the assessment unit, of course, through the NFAC, where more and more details are sought for. And that step or that procedure is really important because as we discuss the issues, in my view, that is where the biggest challenge lies, or that is where most of the issues would lie. But anyways, moving forward, what happens is, once all the information is collected by the assessment unit, it then makes a draft assessment order, which is given to the NFAC. Now, if the assessment order is without any variations, then obviously the order is sent as it is to the SSC without any variation. That's a clean case, so there are no issues there. But if there is a variation which is proposed in the draft assessment order, then the NFAC has two options. One is, of course, that it can issue a show cause notice to the SSC asking, of course, that why such an addition should not be made or why such a variation should not be upheld. Alternatively, the NFAC can send this draft order to a review unit. Now, it's important that the role of the review unit is very critical. The review unit is not just to audit what is being done by the assessment unit, or not just to play a maker checker role, but the review unit is expected to objectively review the assessment order and then propose or recommend its consent or concurrence or disagreement with that draft assessment order. The review unit obviously, and now this again is confusing, but the review unit gives a final draft assessment order to the NFAC. Depending on whether the NFAC has forwarded the draft order to the review unit or not, the show cause notice will actually be accompanied by a draft or a final draft assessment order issued by the review unit. We'll all come to know about it when we we'll be more clear about it when we move further. Basis, of course, this once the show cause notice or the draft assessment order is received from the NFAC, the SSC is supposed to respond. I do not think practically there will be a case where no response is filed, because by now the SSC knows that there is an assessment going on. In all practicality, a response is submitted to the assessment unit through the NFAC. After considering this response, the assessment unit then further determines the finality of the order. Now, I'm not going to go into the further deviations of it, but one important step in this is that if at all the draft order which is received by the SSC is, let's say, proposing a variance of 100 rupees or an addition of 100 rupees to the total income, and basis the response submitted by the SSC, the assessment unit comes to a conclusion that the addition should be 120 and not 100, then in that case, the assessment unit is supposed to, again through the NFAC, forward this to another assessment unit. So there is a system laid down for a maker checker, where if it is prejudicial to the SSE, then another assessment unit will also review or look at the order. And this assessment unit, mind you, is separate from the review unit. Basis that a revised, and now they call it the revised draft order. So there is a draft order, there's a final draft order, and there is a revised draft order, which is again sent to the SSE seeking for responses, and then the cycle continues until a finality is reached. Now that, as complex or complicated it may sound, is the scheme that has been laid down. My gut is that that was probably to ensure that the system is made foolproof. What is a relevant point of discussion here is that if you really look at the whole schema in toto, that there are a lot of internal processes, and if you really view it from an assessee standpoint, while there is a lot happening within the department, where there's an assessment unit which has been either giving it to a technical unit for seeking inputs on legal questions or legal issues, or a verification unit for seeking inputs on facts which require verification in its view, or another assessment unit or a review unit which is playing the role of an auditor or even more for the tax authorities or the tax department. The SSE is unaware of all of this process. What we see is just a portal, and what we see is just an e-proceeding tab in the portal, at least the earlier one. I think the new one also has that. And we just see an issue notice coming through, or a notice coming through, and a response being sought. What is interesting to dwell upon and think of is, would it be possible, and let's take a situation or an example where there is a huge adjustment or an addition being made to the returned income under the faceless assessment. The faceless assessment, eventually the last stage of it is obviously to move all the records to the jurisdictional assessing officer. Is the SSE entitled to understand what happened in the background while all of this or these adjustments were proposed? The scheme is silent on it. So is the law. There is nothing in the law which enables the assessing officer or an assessing unit or the NFAC or any other authority for that matter to provide that information to the SSE. At the same time, there is nothing which precludes any other authority from providing it to the SSE. One route that could be sought is RTI. Of course, I am not an expert in the RTI law, but not sure if this will really fit into the scheme of RTI to seek such an information. But independently, I think even without an RTI application, for my clients at least, I would make an application, especially where there is a material adjustment being proposed in the returned income, to effectively gauge what happened in the backdrop. What was the whole basis? Because I'm assuming, of course, that the order will not capture a lot of discussion which would happen within the team which is assessing the clients or the taxpayers' file, and whether that could actually help the course of litigation, whether that could give me some kind of defense or make my litigation strategy more pointed, more objective. These are questions to answer. On the fundamental question on whether the jurisdictional officer is bound to give you those records, I think we are too premature at this stage, it's quite premature to have known any precedent in this regard. But I would believe that following the principles of natural justice, I think I should be entitled to know what happened in the backdrop while these adjustments were made. Of course, I'm sure there would be arguments on the other side that these are internal documents to the tax authorities or tax officers, and they're not bound to be shared with the taxpayers. But I would just like to draw that thin line of difference that, internal documents is one which is in relation to an approval, where there is a hierarchy and then there is an approval, which could be internal uh, or laid down according to the processes which are internal to the tax department. But this is a code in the Income Tax Act. And if it is a code in the Income Tax Act, it's only fair that the SSC comes to know about the process that was followed before a conclusion was arrived at uh, in terms of the assessment being made in this case. Well, time will tell which ways it goes, but it's an interesting point to dwell upon. Moving further, just a broad comparison into, and we've tried to name it a very old versus new scheme, because there have been so many changes. But what you see on your screen, the e-proceedings is essentially the conventional assessment proceedings that obviously we are used to. The e-assessment scheme was short-lived between 2019 and 2021. From 1st April 2021, we have a faceless assessment in form of Section 144B. If you'll see, a lot of the e-assessment scheme, or lot of what was laid down in the e-assessment scheme would metendis mundis be applicable, and in fact that's what one of the orders also says, that would be applicable to the faceless assessment scheme. 2 or 3 points of distinction between the e-assessment scheme and the faceless assessment scheme. I think that's relevant. One is the draft assessment orders. The e-assessment scheme honestly just had one draft assessment order, and that was it. As we discussed during the flowchart, there's a lot of confusion on the terms of draft assessment order, but I've just tried to simplify it for your benefit. So the faceless assessment scheme essentially talks about 3 draft orders. One is the draft assessment order, which is the initial order which is passed by the assessment unit, or which is the order not passed but made by the assessment unit. The final draft assessment order is the order made after the assessment unit gets inputs from the review unit. And mind you, not every order will be referred to the review unit. It is only those orders which are referred to the review unit will get inputs from the review unit, and that order is the final draft assessment order. And the revised draft assessment order is the order which we sought in an example, where the draft assessment order, let's say, proposes a variation of 100 rupees, and the other assessment and then basis the response from the SSC, the variation is actually ballooning to 120 instead of 100, and then there's a reference to another assessment unit. Now, once those inputs from the other assessment units are received, the order that comes through is the revised draft assessment order. It's important we acclimatize ourselves with this, because even while making our submissions in the course of litigation, these terms are going to be relevant for us to know what transpired at what stage. Moving on, in terms of the distinctions, see, penalty either for non-compliances or other penalties, the e-assessment scheme really had quite simple it's quite simple both ways, but they had clear-cut guidelines to say that, look, any AC on recommendations, and any unit may initiate a penalty proceeding. The faceless assessment scheme really just says that the assessment unit to issue a penalty notice along with the assessment order, and NFAC will share it with the SSC. So I think it's a change in approach, where the assessment unit will now be recommending or deciding the need for a penalty notice to be issued. What is the most critical distinction between the e-assessment scheme and the faceless assessment scheme is the hearing. Okay. When the scheme was laid down in 2019, there was a provision made that upon the request by the SSC, and I'm sure few, or in fact most of us, may have had some experiences around that by now, but the 2019 scheme said that upon the request of the SSC, the assessment unit or the NEAC or the assessment body would grant a hearing through a video conference facility. Now that hearing was given to be, much of an on-demand hearing, but of course it was only towards the end or the conclusion or a show cause stage, if I may put it. What is interesting is the faceless assessment scheme also says that the hearing can be requested, but there is an SOP which has been issued and which we discussed in the slide after this, which says that the personal hearing can be granted. Now, the discretion of granting a personal hearing is on the tax authorities, and it is not a matter of right for the SSE to demand a hearing. It also says that it will grant a personal hearing, or the principal CCIT or whoever is really in charge of that assessment unit will grant a personal hearing only if there is a difference of opinion on facts. Mind you, I'm repeating it again, only if there is a difference of opinion on facts. Now, this to me is absurd, which means that I, as an SSE, have absolutely no opportunity to orally present my case before an assessing unit on a point of law. What I have to present has to be presented through written submissions. One very interesting point, and I'm not sure how much or how many of us are really aware of this, but there is a section 223C in the Income Tax Act. And interestingly, this section has been introduced from 1st of June, 2016, which says hearing includes communication of data and documents through electronic mode. This, if you ask me, is going to be a game changer against the SSE, because hearing includes communication of data and documents through electronic mode would mean that every time I demand an opportunity of being heard, they would only provide an opportunity of making an additional submission and still be compliant with the legal principle of natural justice by providing an opportunity of being heard, because the Income Tax Act itself defines hearing to include communication of data and documents. So long as the submission is made in writing, it is as good as heard. I think these are critical things. These are things which really minute things which we all should, as practitioners, be mindful about in terms of what submissions we make, what is it that we are requesting, and whether the request that we make is technically what we want. Because I'm sure, like I was under an impression, most of us would have been, that when I demand for a hearing, I mean a personal hearing where we're going to meet and there's going to be an exchange of thoughts, of views. But that unfortunately does not seem to be the case. Reiterating the point, the SOP which is laid down for the e-proceeding scheme or the e-assessment scheme, which mutandis mundis applies to a faceless assessment scheme, talks about the discretion being given to a tax authority to provide an opportunity of video conferencing only and only where there is a difference in facts. Very well. Moving ahead, we spoke about the SOPs. Various SOPs, or in fact 5 to be precise, 5 SOPs have been laid down for various units: one for the assessment unit, the technical unit, the verification unit, the review unit, and most importantly, an SOP has been laid down for video conferencing. The SOPs are quite lengthy and they are more procedural. I would not go into them in detail, apart from highlighting 1 or 2 practical points in each of them. I think we can all otherwise go through them in detail as they may apply. But I think one point to be made on the assessment unit or the SOPs for assessment unit is that it is the widest or the power the unit with the widest power. It has absolute wide scope. The assessment unit really has very wide scope because that is a sub-nodal authority, or really the backing for the nodal authority, if I may say. The timelines of the whole assessment scheme or the assessment proceedings is something which the assessment unit will have to be mindful of. The timeline of issue of notice, the timeline of issue of order, the analysis of the data, or at least the preliminary analysis, and the fate of the data would be decided by the assessment unit. They obviously decide on whether the matter needs to be referred to the verification unit or the technical unit, and also about the drafting of orders. Very crucial. What it says is that the first notice, the SOP says that in an assessment unit, the first notice, it should give time of 15 days. For subsequent notices, time may be reduced to 7 days. I repeat, 7 days. Okay, and there has been a lot of hue and cry. I'm sure all of us have gone through that churn in the last year, where we were, at least I was pleading. I was pleading, unfortunately not oral, but through my written letters, asking for time for the quantum and volume of data that has been asked for. And uh, they just got gave time which was quite irrational in my view. But the SOP itself says, time may be reduced to 7 days. We should all not be surprised if we are not getting enough time to respond to notices. How to deal with it is something which we cover as we go forward. That is important aspect on the assessment unit. I think the verification unit also important to note. There is a process laid down for multiple verifications, but I think the most widely practiced verification, in my view, in the income tax department is the 133(6), where information is sought from a third person. It says that as soon as the verification unit receives a request for verification, within 5 days, the verification unit is supposed to send a notice to the third party from whom information is to be sought for, and the third party gets 7 days to respond to that notice. Again, that information is communicated, or that notice is communicated to such third party, either by way of an email or on his online portal, and then a notification by way of an SMS. This, I already envisage a lot of practical challenges in this, because we do not know who this third person is, and whether that third person is really as frequent in visiting his e-filing portal, or checking his emails and SMS. But that is where we are. Non-compliance, also a procedure laid down on what is to be done if there is non-compliance to a 133(6) notice. But I think more from an assessee standpoint, and it's the assessee who would lose more if a 133(6) notice goes unresponded by a third party. Anyways, I think it's for us. It's a big learning curve for all of us on how to deal with it. Some practical aspects we'll discuss later. Technical unit. Interestingly, the scope of technical unit. Legal matters, TP matters, special audits, valuations, information to be called from foreign jurisdictions. Very, very important. A procedure or a SOP laid down there. It's very important. While the ambit of it may not be much, but I think the importance of it is very high. Analysis of accounts. All of this falls within the scope of technical unit. Fortunate, unfortunate, I am not sure, but the whole country has just 4 technical units. I just hope that they manage the workload both in terms of technical issues arising, as well as their quality of output given their strength. The SOP for personal hearing, I think that is the most critical for all of us to understand. because this is going to be the norm. So long as we live in an era of faceless assessments, uh, a personal hearing and how do we seek a personal hearing is something which we'll have to be acclimatized with. Uh, First things first, it is very clear and very important to know that a personal hearing is only on demand. Unless you ask for it, you will not get it. So make sure that a personal hearing is requested for in the submissions. A separate request is made, because unless requested, I think even in the course of litigation, it will not help if the request at the first instance is not made. The SOP says that the personal hearing would ordinarily be for 30 minutes. Well, short or long depends on the complexity of the case, but I'm assuming that if a personal hearing is sought for and provided, both 30 minutes on the face of it seems to be very less. However, there is a provision that it can be extended at the request of the SSE. So, but yes, to be prepared, even our conduct during the personal hearing, given the paucity of time, what are those points which we really want to harp on and make an impact during the personal hearing, or that rare opportunity, if I may say, being received. Furnishing documents, evidences post personal hearing. If there are some things which transpire out of the personal hearing, I'm sure there would be discussions to say that the SSE would say, we will provide you with certain more factual details, just to prove the point that we are making. That needs to be made without too much of a time lag. Again, it's in SSE's interest that we do it as soon as the personal hearing is done. Moving on to issues, a year gone by, and whether the spirit and the intention were really followed. Uh, we'll see. We've tried to bucket, but the issue that you'll see at times there is an overlap. But I'm going to take about 10 minutes to really talk about each issue, and maybe possible resolutions, or at least what we have tried and can try doing differently while these issues crop up. First and foremost, adjournment requests. Oh, I never have gotten adjournment in Faceless. I never seem to have gotten adjournment. It was for want of a better word, it was actually so funny at times, where today is the last day of submission. I file an adjournment because of genuine reasons, and trust me, genuine reasons. And the adjournment granted was till tomorrow. Well, one of those moments you don't know whether to laugh or cry, but I have experienced it. But later on, I've been told that I was lucky to have at least been granted one, be it for a day. And subsequently, as I realized, in fact, they just don't pay heed to adjournment requests, as if that request never reaches them. But that is the fate of it. While we have our own pain points, see, it's one thing in the same breath, very important to understand, and just standing in at point zero, I was trying to evaluate what or why would this behavior really be justified, or how can it be justified. But you look at the overall timelines being squeezed, right? The whole assessment proceeding timeline being squeezed. And if you see what happens, you look at the process that we went through. It is like playing a game of football or hockey, where one player is passing to another, then again to him, then again back to him, and again back to him, and again back to him, and where the ball is moving, but the players don't move as fast as the ball, right? And the SSE really plays the role of the goalkeeper, because he has to protect that goal or save that goal. It's so important to keep a track on the ball rather than the players passing the ball, right? And if one unit, and on that anecdote, if you see one unit moving to another to one unit, relevant and appropriate time being given to, let's say, a verification unit, a review unit, a technical unit, a draft assessment being passed, uh, uh, a show cause being issued to the SSE, the SSE responding, SSE asking for a personal hearing being given. You look at the whole process. It's not only tiring, but it's so lengthy that if it is not carried out in a time-bound manner, I am sure we will be the ones jumping on our seats saying that, look, what is going on. But yes, I think that said, cooperation from our end would be expected by the tax authorities. Not that not that I have any irrational sympathies for them, but it's just about understanding the process and just understanding the psyche behind not granting adjournments. Of course, what is unfair is not granting adjournments despite of genuine reasons. And just as we speak of this, there is a Delhi High Court uh, decision where an adjournment was genuinely sought because the SSE and her daughter were COVID positive. A lot of records were in the office. The consultant being quarantined. Uh, I think on compassionate grounds, uh, the least that was expected was an adjournment, but what instead they got is an order with an adjustment. So unfortunate but true. I think both sides, coming a step ahead would serve the purpose. What is also and what also then goes along with an adjournment is short deadlines or short timelines for submissions. Uh, I, in my experience, again, there was one such instance where I was worn out with the continuous short timelines being offered by the assessment unit in question then. So much so that I had to write a very politely strong submission saying that, I think the unit just needs to be a little more generous on granting time. Uh, I think the whole distinction between working hours and working days was collapsed while the time frame was issued or the timelines was issued. Uh, I had to very gently remind them that, look, the notice, while they state, and that is another issue, that while they state was issued on the 21st of August, we really got it on the 23rd of August and 24th, 25th, 20, I'm sorry, of January. So, 21st of January, which was received on 23rd of January in the evening, while we had just 24th, 25th, and 26th, and 27th is when the submission was expected to be filed, without realizing that the 24th, 25th was a weekend and 26th was a national holiday, and the long weekend does merit a, a time off from break or a break off from work. But it unfortunately had to be reminded, whether taken in stride or no, I am not sure. But yes, I at least got the time that I sought for. So yes, maybe that has worked for me. It could work for others as well. But yes, unfortunate but true. The need to remind the tax authorities about working days and business hours in general. Apart from that, there are multiple issues in terms of procedures. We have seen personal hearings not granted at all, personal hearings denied. So one is, of course, when asked for and not granted at all. There was no murmur or whisper of it. There have been instances where personal hearings were completely denied. They said that we would not grant you a personal hearing. Now that seems unfair, right from the face of it. Even during a personal hearing, it's quite it's quite disturbing to understand. Let's say if the personal hearing is pertaining to an issue of verification or a technical issue, which of course the SOP says you can't have, but if the SSE really wants to, I'm not sure how much or would the assessment unit be equipped to, to make an assessment on the technical and verification related issues. Draft assessment order was not sent before the passing of final assessment order. We spoke of it. There are situations when a draft assessment order is required to be sent along with the show cause notices. A lot of lapse has been seen there. These have been very common issues. I'm sure each one of us have gone through all of this in the course of faceless assessment. The urge would, of course, be, while there is a step taken from the department's side on trying of or kind of correcting these teething issues. I think there are some housekeeping which we can also inculcate, just so that we ensure that we are also well prepared to address these issues as we move further. Issue of jurisdiction, I think we'll discuss that in a little more detail in subsequent slide. But that's been quite an interesting debate that has been coming up. Uh, yeah, happy to share that I think this was also envisaged in the 2019 discussion we had at the Pune branch institute, where what is going to be the relevance and of all the issues. One is, of course, what is going to be the relevance of the decision of the jurisdictional high court. We have an Agra ITAT recently, which is held that the NEAC, or the assessment unit, whoever is the authority assessing, is bound to consider the jurisdictional high court decision on where the SSE is, or where the pan of the SSE really lies. It's an interesting debate that may transpire, especially on issues like employers' contribution or employees' contribution to, or delay in payment of employees' contribution to PF, and the deductibility of that. Technical issues, we have seen very interesting notices do not reflect on a real-time basis in the portal, which means that the already short grant of time is shortened further. While in the assessing officer's mind, he may have granted us 7 days, but by the time we receive the notice, and it's not that we not check the portal every minute or every hour or every day, but it's genuine that we see that the notice is signed on a particular date, but which was received on the income tax portal itself maybe 2 or 3 days hence. Now in a 7-day or a 6-day time period, it's already talking about cutting down 50% of the time that was available. Operational issues, file size, file name, file format. Oh, we've spent hours, a criminal waste of time trying to understand. I have absolutely failed to understand what is the problem with having a space in the file name. I don't know, but maybe there's something to do with technology which I can't grapple with. But I'm sure there would be ways and means to tackle it. But that's the reality. A lot of time of we practicing consultants going into all of this. Restriction on file size, errors being cropped up. This is been there in the systems, and I'm sure again all of you all would have faced this. One very important, and if you see a laundry list of other issues also being there, 2 or 3 main issues I would really want to highlight, and that's at least been our experience in the year that has gone by, is there have been a lot of aggressive additions on section 68 and section 69, unexplained credits and unexplained investments. And now what has actually led to, and if I have to just reflect back, I think there has been a lot of data that was asked for. You give us additions to fixed assets, you give us details on a particular expenditure, and for a 5,000 crore turnover company, they would want details of expenses 1 lakh and above, with of course only a file size uploading limit of 50 MB in total. Yes, they have been accommodative, where we said that look, given the size, please accommodate our request of having more material, or maybe the top 25 or top 30 expenditures, and then if you have anything further, maybe we can dwell deeper into it. But it just doesn't make submitting expenditures 1 lakh and above. But if there was no response, or a response which was not to the liking of the assessment units, it was just in doubt that all of these expenditures, all these expenses are bogus, all the the fixed asset purchases are bogus, all the commission payments are bogus. Now And that coupled with the procedure laid down for 133.6, they would at times either reach out to the vendor in question, they may not reach out to the vendor in question, they may just make an addition. But that's created a lot of avoidable chaos in my view, because as we speak, we know that everything is going to be faceless, and if faceless IT/AT was to see the light of the day, then we are saying that the entire fact finding mechanism, including rectification, is proposed to be faceless. I do not have an answer on how am I really going to explain all of this. Yes, maybe by writing oral or writing written submissions to say that, look, this is all genuine, but how do I prove genuinity, by way of a submission? It's quite interesting. At times I get funny thoughts and on am I really going to, is the affidavit of that vendor by itself going to suffice? And if it would, what explanation would be given to say that, why didn't you then reproduce it at the time of assessment? Would it tantamount to additional evidence? What will happen to that additional evidence? Will it go back? The remand reports, the processes there, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare as I think of it. But that is the reality. I think a word of caution, requests like these not to be taken lightly. I was fortunate that all the requests, at least sent on my clients on these issues, were all dealt with and actually judiciously assessed, right? So that is important. But we do have issues around that. So many, I mean, short grant of TDS. Oh, that's again been a painful issue. We've had intimations received where the TDS credit is allowed of 100 rupees, but when an assessment is made and the computation is received from CPC along with the assessment, the TDS credit somehow just comes down to 90. My 26 AS, my 143 1A, it all shows 100, but I don't know from where and why the CPC has a record only of 90, and then again a criminal waste of time trying to defend the obvious, which is the additional credit of 10. But we all deal with some of them may be fact specific, some of them may be issues which are peculiar, need to be dealt with as the cases. One interesting point, and I still remember this written TIFF, with an assessment unit where they just took all the submissions, and the submissions were collated with no time to breathe, and they were collated as if there was a war starting tomorrow. I mean, what I'm obviously trying to say is that they were all made on war footing, and it was very nice where the right from first notice for assessment, it said that, look, they're doing all of this for the SSE or for the taxpayer, because the taxpayer would have anxiety about an open assessment, and just to put that one rest, or put to rest that one anxiety amongst this pandemic, they were trying to help us to close that assessment. And I think about a collation of data for close to 3 weeks, there was this dead silence, for 3 months, and so much so that we had to actually make or write. Unfortunately, our tab was open, where we had to write a submission saying that, look, you started by wanting to help me with my anxiety, but you're now actually making me anxious, because until I received the notice, I wasn't anxious, for the simple reason that I knew my assessment was not open. But the minute you sent a notice, my anxiety did go to a next level, and now with no show, no response, my anxiety has gone to a different level altogether. I don't know whether that or something else, but fortunately the taxpayer or the client did get a clean assessment order there. But yes, that point of a dead silence after collation of data is also very prevalent, where we keep wondering what's happening in the background. Maybe it's the movement of the file from one unit to another that takes that long. Moving on, interesting to know what's happened in the courtrooms in relation to the faceless assessments. Last 1 year has been quite eventful in the courtroom. Mind you, I mean, this is all when the courtrooms were also functioning in a limited way that they could, obviously, because initially they took time to come with a with a scheme where they could function on an online manner. But despite all of that, it's interesting to see, what were the kind of issues which went to the courtroom and what the courts have held in relation to the faceless assessment. What were the main issues leading to litigation? When one is, of course, requests for personal hearings and written submissions were not being considered before passing assessment orders. It was as if the SSE is speaking to the wall. Well, it was writing to the wall, but the writing on a wall is different, at least connoted differently. This was as if the SSE is writing to a wall and not on a wall. That we want a personal hearing. These are our submissions. This is why we justify our claims. But absolutely no heed given to whatever was submitted, and an assessment order being passed, leaving no option for SSEs or taxpayers but to go and knock the doors of the High Court in a jurisdiction. Taxpayers' requests for adjournment were not considered. We spoke about it in case of an individual where genuine COVID-19 positive reports were submitted, but still an adjournment was not granted. That was quite inhuman in my humble opinion. Draft assessments are not sent to taxpayers before passing the final assessment order. I think the tax authorities and from what I know, I think themselves are struggling and grappling with the whole process that has been laid down and the frequent changes to it. Now, passing of assessment order prior to the expiry of the show cause notice. This is very interesting. We've covered a few of these cases in the case studies as well. It is again so it is so weird, for want of a better word, where you give me a show cause notice, you give me a time of 10 days to respond to the show cause notice, and you pass an order, let's say on the 7th day or the 8th day. It's strange. It is not acceptable. I think the due process of law has to be followed, and I think the courts have taken cognizance of it. Notices not getting uploaded, of course, reflected on e-filing portal on a real-time basis. We've discussed about it. Issues have gone to the courts as well. Just a snapshot of what you see. It's actually covered the length and breadth. This is of course only the rulings which are available in public domain. There could be rulings which are not available to us, which may not have been reported. There could be other cases which may still be being heard, right? But as many as 37 cases that we could pull out in relation to faceless assessment in the last 1 year, and in my view, it's quite a number. I think it's important everyone does, or the right ears and the right authorities takes cognizance of this. Interesting, the issues that we have discussed already. I would urge to look at the first issue again. We discussed about it when I began, or in the first 15-20 minutes of the presentation. Very important to note that after 1st April 2021, all assessment orders received, irrespective of whether the assessment was initiated after 1st April 21 or prior to 1st April 21. All assessment orders or all assessments made are required to be following the procedure of 144B. Any order passed which is not in accordance with the procedures followed in 144B is bad in law. It is void because the procedure laid down in law is not being followed, liable to be quashed. Interesting. I am just now jumping the gun as we may go to it again. This is relevant for us. This is a Bombay High Court, our jurisdictional High Court decision. Uh, let's spend a minute because this is important again for our clients for assessment orders received between 1st April to 30th June. Because there was an extension of timeline, it's important we review this fact and take a ground if it is being litigated. Look at this. Look at this case of Piramal Enterprises. Draft assessment order was passed under 144C, which is the DRP route, even before compliance of requirements specified under 144B. Okay. Request was made by the SSC for a personal hearing, which was not entertained. SSC has filed a writ under an apprehension that the final order would be passed based on the draft assessment order without providing an opportunity of being heard. The High Court, okay, has stayed and said that the SSC can lodge a complaint or can lodge a stay there, lodge a objection before the DRP. What is also important, and I think this is equally or in fact more precise and more relevant, is the Delhi High Court in case of Gurgaon Realtech Limited. Assessment order has been passed on 15th of April 21, which is after 1st of April 21. It was passed under 144.3, read with 143.3A, 143.3B of the Act. Okay, assessment order 15th of April, 143.3, read with 143.3A and 143.3B. Now, what is the plea? The contention is that in accordance with 144B and the relevant notification and 143.3D, assessments could not have been passed under 143.3A and 143.3B, which means to say that the assessment was required to be made only under 144B. The conclusion was that after 1/4/21, the Delhi High Court has held that assessment orders could not have been passed other than 144B. Hence, the assessment order is set aside and the matter should be assessed afresh under 144B. Whether a fresh assessment really serves the purpose is a practical call to be taken. But so far as the quashing of the present assessment order is concerned, is a technical point which can be argued well before the courts or during the course of litigation. You see lengths and breadths of courts laying decisions. If you'd see most of the cluster of decisions was around personal hearing should have been granted. We spoke about it as an issue in detail that personal hearing has not been granted. We know what has been the amendment in the Act since 2016. What does hearing mean? And is there effectively a difference between a hearing and a personal hearing? But I think what has been invoked is the principles of natural justice. And let's look at some of the cases and what a few of these courts have held. This was a case again discussed in the 2019 discussion of the session as well. It's a simple point. This Madras High Court, if you look at these timelines, return of income filed in November 2017. First notice, if you see, was issued June 19 and then again August and October 19. But the submissions were made and the finality of the assessment was towards December 2019. If you see the gap between November 17 to let's say June or October 2019, there was a gap of close to 2 years, and mind you, this is a pre-COVID time, 2 years. What interesting observation of the Madras High Court has been is that since the assessment proceedings now do not require a human interaction anymore, and the entire evaluation of the fact pattern is based on the data that is submitted, it is important that the assessing officer fully understands the business of the petitioner. Okay. There is a categorical observation to say that it appears that the return was filed in November 2017. However, the proceedings commenced much later, that is towards the fag end of the timelines prescribed for conclusion of assessment, and that the assessing officer should have been more prompt in the initiation and the conclusion of the proceedings. Now, look, if I was to defend a shorter timeline being given, I as a tax officer was to defend a short timeline being provided for submissions, I would very well rely with this case saying that, look, I am not saying this. The Madras High Court has directed that I should have been more prompt. But be that as it may, I think mindful for SSEs or as consultants to be aware of this. A quick, and I know we are left with little time, but a quick look at few of the cases that have been held. Assessment order, and if you see the one on the Madras High Court on the Kevin Alphonse case, which says that assessment order was passed at 4:22 p.m. in the evening, although the time provided to the SSE to submit the response was not over, because that was provided till 23:59. I don't know what is it about that 23:59 timeline with the tax officers, but that 23:59 timeline of the same day was the time provided in the notice. The assessment order was already passed at 4:22 p.m. The court has come down very heavily, saying that this was an assessment made with a preset mind, and it has quashed the assessment. However, it has remitted back for adjudication on the basis of merits, wanting to consider the responses. Similar, timelines. If you see, 13th of April, when the draft and the draft assessment order and the show cause notice was received, again called upon to respond on 14th of April. 1 day's, mind you, 1 day time provided to respond to a show cause notice. It's very difficult, and it's practically challenging, to explain to a tax authority or anyone who's issuing that notice, to say that, look, this is not the only thing that we are waiting for, that you would send us a notice and we would be here all guns blazing to respond to you within 24 hours. And an adjournment was filed, but again, the court has come down very heavily to say that only 24 hours to comply with the notice is not sufficient. It has been set aside due to violation of principles of natural justice. You have so many of such examples on timelines, on, where this again, what you see, the KBB Nuts Private Limited case, Delhi High Court, where it was, the time provided was much beyond the assessment order being passed. I am just going to maybe quickly skip through a few of these cases, since they all lead to the same point, that this really is something which is not in compliance with the principles of natural justice, where you just do not or should not be giving an opportunity of being heard, but a reasonable opportunity of being heard. And it is also important, well, this does not form part of any legal principle, but I think it is my own principle, to say that it's also important that it is heard in the right spirit, in the context, without any preset mind and without any preconceived notions to conclude an assessment in one particular manner or the other. We've touched upon all of this. It's important to dwell upon the whole concept of principle of natural justice, because unfortunately, as we litigate, and we've already seen the quantum of litigation, but unfortunately, as we litigate in relation to the faceless assessment schemes, the entire thrust of litigation is going to hinge upon the principles of natural justice. The principle of natural justice, theoretically or fundamentally or legally, is really can be captured in two buckets. And one is where it is specified under the law. And when you say it is specified under the law, is that where the law actually, or the legal principle of the law actually specifies that the compliance to this provision would effectively lead to natural justice being provided. and where it is not specified in the statute, then obviously it comes from various courts or various decisions laid down by the courts and from the common law principles of what you and I would otherwise understand natural justice to mean. In the context of 144B, what is relevant is what you see to the left of your side, that is, if specified under the statute, right? To say that hearing under the IT Act includes electronic communication, and which we've seen the definition of hearing under section 223C of the Income Tax Act. In case assessee disagrees with a variation proposed in the draft assessment order, personal hearing so as to make an oral submission or to present his case may be requested by the assessee. Again, important to note, request is necessary. However, such requests, and here we rely on the SOPs, and which, in my opinion, is absolutely unfair, that I will get a chance or an opportunity to make oral representations only and only where there is going to be a dispute on facts. That that just led me uh, to analyze a little further on the legal principle of audi alteram partem. Now, what this legal principle essentially or fundamentally obviously means is that a fair opportunity or a fair hearing should be granted to the parties affected. Now, that's the simple point being made. And there's a beautiful articulation by the Supreme Court in the P.N. Easwar Iyer case. Of course, it's not an income tax case, but if I have to just read the second para on the slide, which says that the magic of the spoken word, the power of scholastic process, and the instant clarity of bar bench dialogue are too precious to be parted with. And I deeply acknowledge and back this philosophy or this opinion of the Supreme Court, where the whole dialogue of bar bench is so precious to be parted with. Uh, it can as it is be applied to assessment proceedings as well. Uh, you know uh, where the whole solution could lie, where a system could really be built to come up with, where one can have the best of both worlds. Uh, just for as an example, maybe a threshold or a limit, or depending on a threshold on the complexity of the case, or a quantum threshold, where an opportunity of hearing could be could be given more judiciously or more liberally, if I may say. Important again, another Supreme Court in Nageswara Rao, personal hearings enables authorities concerned to watch the demeanor of the witness and clear up his doubts during the course of the arguments, and the party appearing to persuade the authority by reasoned argument to accept his point of view. So many times, I'm sure I'm certainly not the first one speaking about this, but a body language at the time of speaking, the body language, in a oral hearing or a personal hearing, it just cannot be replaced with a written submission. Also, the fact that oral hearing, among the mammoth data, and mind you, again, many a times that data may not have been submitted by me as an assessee by choice. It is because the assessing officer called for that huge quantum of data, which I have submitted. I should at least get an opportunity to highlight the relevant amongst that whole quantum of data that has been submitted. Importance of oral hearing can never be taken away. There is a precise determination of facts, even in the context of factual cases. I think it's very important that oral hearing would obviously have at least in my view, have an edge over written submissions, and not taking away anything from written submissions. They are equally necessary, but the oral hearings or the written submissions by itself, I don't think can replace oral hearings in all cases, on a blanket basis. Moving on, certain other issues, of course, arising in the faceless scheme was, conflicting jurisdictional high court decisions. Just a couple of things which we could think of. Interesting observation of the ITAT Agra bench. It's interesting. What actually surprised me more on this case is that a faceless assessment matter was already in the ITAT, and the ITAT has already pronounced its ruling in this. That is some speed and efficiency, in the favor of faceless assessments. But the ITAT is clearly laid down that the Mahadev decision, as is referred to, where it is clearly laid down that the NFAC, or the National Faceless Assessment Center, while it may be located at Delhi, but it is bound to follow the jurisdictional high court decision, or the SSE's AO's jurisdiction, and the decision laid down by the high court of that jurisdiction. So therefore, if there is, let's say, a favorable Bombay High Court decision and an unfavorable Karnataka High Court decision, we SSEs from Pune are bound by the Bombay High Court decision, and so is the assessing unit, irrespective of whichever part of the country they would be assessing us from, but they would be bound to give us the benefit of the Bombay High Court decision over the Karnataka High Court decision. And I think that's only fair. We all are aware of the principles of res judicata and the whole judicial hierarchy, or the binding precedent in tax matters, right? Which high court will have jurisdiction? Of course, that's another debate. I will just go further. I think this debate may just intensify a little when the reassessment scheme is completely into a faceless bit, because that's where most of the writs challenging the reassessment initiation itself are filed. Admittedly, knowing that the whole process of reassessment itself is going through or the initiation of reassessment at least itself is going through a sea change. If you see, again, two decisions to highlight here. One is the Delhi High Court in the case of Marigold, and the Bombay High Court in the case of Sungard. This all is to lead to where or which high court will have jurisdiction over an SSE. It's in a very interesting fact pattern. In the Marigold case, you had the jurisdictional AO which was located in Rajasthan, right? And then the files were transferred to Faridabad, and therefore, while in the meantime the assessments were made, the appeal was preferred in the ITAT Delhi bench, which obviously had the jurisdiction over Faridabad. The contention was, of course, that whether or which jurisdiction was to be followed. The revenue obviously saying that it should have gone to the Punjab and Haryana High Court. That because that is where the jurisdiction of the ITAT held, and the situs of the AO, the SSC's contention being that the situs of the AO should, or the seat of the AO should be the jurisdiction of the High Court. On an divergent or a digressed fact pattern, the Bombay High Court, of course, has held that it is the situs of the AO which will determine the jurisdiction of the High Court. Interesting controversy, which again needs to be unfolded as we go further. While we have very little time left, towards the end, just wanted to touch upon a few do's, don'ts, some things we should be mindful about, while making submissions, some practical experiences, some good, some bad, and how we all can benefit collectively from it. This is just mapping a few of the timelines. The simple point that is trying to be made is, while we had an era about 4 or 5 years ago, where the assessments completion could be, say, anywhere between 3 to 4 years from the filing of the return, we are now talking about that timeline being squeezed to to a year or 15 months, as low as that. What it effectively means is that speed is the name of the game. We have seen that speed from the national faceless assessment centers and units. I think it's only fair, and uh, it's only reasonable that we also acclimatize ourselves with that speed, to be fair to the administration, to be fair to the policymakers, uh, not to complain, but at least in my experience, the speed of the refunds or granting of refunds has also seen a significant swiftness in it. I could have never imagined a refund being credited on the third or fourth day of filing of return. But yes, we have seen instances like that, whatever be the quantum of refunds. But I think as we move forward, we also see large quantum refunds being credited to our accounts very swiftly at an unimaginable pace. Uh, Way forward, some key pointers on drafting. Uh, as we draft submissions, uh, as we said, just make sure. See, we have to understand the attention span of the tax authorities. uh, they obviously are not just reading a submission that is going to be filed for our clients. They are on an average, and we just had some data to go about that. An officer in an assessment unit would be loaded with an average 150 cases, 150 assessments. So every authority, he or she is obviously going to be reading to 150 submissions, lengthy submissions, uh, if they do. And it's not that lengthy submissions cannot be made, but a good practice to have an executive summary at the top. uh, and it's in our own interest, just so that it highlights what is it that we want to argue. Reliance on case laws, I think, very important, that whatever case law is being relied upon, whatever or rather principle that is being relied upon, the extracts of the case laws are put in the submission only for those cases which are direct, which are direct concerning our case. uh, you know when we are responding to questions, it's very important to put yourself into the shoes of the assessing officer, to know where is he coming from, where is the officer coming from, what would be his perspective. uh, what I have followed as a practice, and which has helped me, is that if it is not clear, we have given a submission, and or rather at least put across our assumption, stating that I believe this is what your good self is looking for, or looking at, or deriving to, and this is our submission in this regard. However, if this is not the case, then we request you to please clarify what is it that you are looking for, which will only enable us to make a more precise and more accurate submission. Simple to the point language, I think, which everyone will understand. Subjects, references, page numbering, annexures, simple points. But at times I feel that while we are referring to a particular section, or the quoting of that section in the submission also helps, because it just to that extent reduces the effort of the officer picking up the act and then trying to correlate our submission with a different piece of paper. It's just all there. Annexures numbered serially, filed in a and the references of that serial numbers forming part of the submission. It's all about how you can make things easy for the person to understand. I think that's the simple point. And if you'll see, nothing of this is rocket science. Uh, Address each point as a matter of practice. What we've been following, and which we've realized has been liked, because I know a lot of offline matters, a lot of assessing officers has complemented that approach, is where we pick up each and every point in the notice and address it against each and every point. So even if we are not submitting something against a point, we reproduce that point and say that we do not have anything to submit, or we will submit later, or this is not applicable to us. It just helps closure of various points raised by the assessing officer in a more methodical and a systematic manner. Avoid standard drafts, and I think that's very important, including adjournments. Uh, uh, while we are irked, and at least I get irked or irritated with standard questionnaires being issued, uh, you know, the officers also ought to, and I don't know whether that's true, but I won't be surprised if they ought to paint every SSC with the same brush then, where you say that we are busy with tax audits, we are busy with this, maybe a little more creativity or reality in seeking adjournments, because we all know that we seek adjournments only for a reason. 133.6 we spoke about. We have enough of do's and don'ts. Also, at the time of personal hearings, if I was to bring that to everyone's notice, the precision, the point that we have to drive, preparation would be the key. I think the more prepared we are while we go into a personal hearing, uh, it helps in a focused hearing. It would help in not digressing. Most importantly, it will be helpful in driving the hearing and making more clear submissions of course to the authorities. I have a list of key data that are requested and how they can really be addressed and my views on them. But I think we are towards the end of it. I am I am not going to take too much time further. I know I'm standing between you and a Friday night, but just a snapshot of how things work globally. And India is not the only country to have faceless assessment. I began by saying that it's a revolution in itself. Uh, if we were to follow a global practice, I think this is where we we are. Important to note certain key distinctions. The Indian practice, as we discussed earlier, draft assessment order is also reviewed by a separate independent officer, be it a review unit or another unit. UK has a lot of tech built in their assessment proceedings. There's some artificial intelligence which they have very targeted inquiries and investigations, and a process to follow that. Uh, USA USA and Netherlands are actually very interesting. They have a feedback survey. I think that a leaf from that page can certainly be taken in India as well. A feedback, given that uh, you know uh, the whole mindset and the approach of the tax department coming through as a service provider, a feedback from taxpayer. And I hope uh, there isn't something which I'm not aware of, but at least never experienced it. Netherlands has top 100 taxpayers, and a separate plan for assessments, and so we had something similar in India in the large taxpayers unit, where it was very focused and it was only for large taxpayers. It of course collapsed eventually, but that also is not a bad plea, where you can have more focused approach, a more issue based approach there. I thank you for your uh, patience and bearing with me for the past 2 hours. I would stop my session here, and I don't know, sir, if we have time for any questions, but happy to address online or offline. I may just maybe leave the deck uh, uh, with my details, my email address and my phone number, in case anyone wishes to reach out uh, to me in person.
Yeah, I think that would be better, so that those people who have questions can contact you directly. One question I have in chat box, which you can answer if possible quickly. That is how to file a rectification request against assessment order passed under faceless assessment in respect of mistake apparent from the record. This is from Anuja Utpat.
Sure. Thank you, sir. And well, see, at the moment, so there are two things. There is a section 157A, 157 capital A, which has been introduced in the Income Tax Act. However, that is empowering or providing powers to lay down a scheme for a faceless rectification. But that scheme has not yet been laid down. As things stand at the moment, a rectification application will have to be made before the jurisdictional assessing officer. because as the scheme stands today, once an assessment is completed, the assessment records are supposed to be transferred to the jurisdictional assessing officer, and the rectification rights have been given to the jurisdictional assessing officer.
Okay. Thank you, Rahul. You excellently explained the faceless assessment journey from e-proceeding to e-assessment, the legislative developments, flow of information, the entire structure and the assessment schema under Section 144B, which I believe certainly help the participants in handling the cases in future. This session was very much needed at this point of time, and I thank you, Management Committee, for arranging this session for all of us. You also highlighted a few case studies which will help the audience to handle the relevant issues. Everyone who is into direct tax practice must view the flowchart given in Excel sheet and understand it in detail to provide qualitative service to their clients. Thanks, Rahul, for this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure speaking at the Pune branch.
Yes.
And thank you for the participants and the audience for the patience. Yeah. The topic is quite technical. It's quite procedural.
Yes.
And I hope I of course made an honest attempt not to make it boring, but I hope it landed well with the participants as well.
Yeah, it was certainly excellent topic, and you explained it very in detail. And I think this is a new subject, so we'll need some time for everyone to understand it.
Certainly will, sir. Certainly. So thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you again. You've been a patient audience. Thanks.
Thank you.